benefit of an HOA is the fact that, in theory, you paying this HOA should get you to a point where you're not having to pay for things such as a new roof, or if a window gets busted, all of those things should be covered. Your gutters on the facility itself are falling down. All of that needs to be covered, or should be covered, via the HOA. Lawn service, things of that nature. But then you have what is called a special assessment. And those special assessments are when the HOA decides to reevaluate the costs associated with operating the facilities, and that in turn could increase your HOA payments dramatically. What's going on, folks? Eddie Carrington, mayor of Flux City, and today I am inside a unit that I have that a tenant just moved out of, and this is a condo. This is actually a condo that I bought from Wayne County for $6,300, and that was back in 2017. And I have had somebody living in it since then, and so now I'm trying to debate on what I would like to do with this site. So I'm gonna walk you around, talk to you a little bit, and get your thoughts on using condos as a means to generate quote unquote passive or rental income. All right, so just got back access to my unit, and looks like I got a little cleaning up to do, but tenant for the most part did decent with regard to taking care of my unit. I do wish that the tenant cleaned out the unit a little bit better, but for the most part, a little bit of sweeping, wiping down. I got some paint I need to touch up. But yeah, I got my 1-bedroom unit back that I ended up buying for $6,300. So this is the actual utility room of this condo building. And at the end of the day, it gets the job done. You got your washer and dryer, nothing fancy, of course. But in here you have your storage. And surprisingly, the newer buildings that are coming online don't necessarily have storage in this capacity, right? Whereas in this scenario, your tenant is going to have access to their own storage compartment, as you can see here. So the good thing is the tenant who just moved out cleaned this out at the very least, but we have a lot of cleaning to do in the actual unit that the tenant lived in. So I'm going to have to schedule some things out. For an example, a painter. I'll probably end up painting it myself, but a cleaner, I may end up hiring that portion of the job out, because I do want to make sure that this unit is cleaned up as good as it can be. And I'm not necessarily the cleanest when it comes to that type of process, and I want this unit to sparkle, right? And so at the end of the day, here we are. We have a tenant who just moved out of this condo that I've owned since 2017, and I've had a tenant in it since then. And I bought it from the Wayne County auction, and I would say it's a pretty good investment. But I love but also hate condos when it comes to using them as a format to lease out to tenants. And I'm going to talk to you about why a little bit later. I wanted to get back possession of the unit as quick as possible so I can get things in motion in order to get this bad boy cleaned out and to figure out what I want to do with it moving forward. I do want to put it back online, find another tenant for it, but I may end up selling it. The challenge with that is the market itself is pretty bad when it comes to condos due to the concern of association fees, or HOAs, right? And so that's one thing that I'm thinking through. But so the $6,300 condo carried roughly a $240 HOA fee for quite some time. but recently they have bumped it up. At one point it was at $318. Now they're bumping it up closer to $400. So when you incorporate the HOA, the property taxes, and the insurance on a property such as this, your carrying costs are closer to about $550 a month, right? And so finding a tenant that is willing to pay $800-900 for a one-bedroom unit gets you to a point where you're profiting a decent amount of money on this unit. But at the same time, it does cut into your profits. The HOA cuts into your profits. Now, the benefit of an HOA is the fact that, in theory, you paying this HOA should get you to a point where you're not having to pay for things such as a new roof, or if a window gets busted, all of those things should be covered. Your gutters on the facility itself are falling down. All of that needs to be covered, or should be covered, via the HOA. Lawn service, things of that nature. But then you have what is called a special assessment. And those special assessments are when the HOA decides to reevaluate the costs associated with operating the facilities, and that in turn could increase your HOA payments dramatically. It could be a scenario where it's a few $10, few $100, or even a few $1,000s a month, as we are seeing in the Florida market right now. Due to the collapse of that one condo facility, there was a massive engineering mistake, structural mistake that was made, and there was this condo in Florida that basically collapsed because the way the building was designed, there was water getting into the core support structure of the facility, weakening it over the years and ultimately causing it to collapse. And so now insurance companies are, specifically in Florida, but in a way everywhere across the country, are reevaluating insurance policies for condo facilities. And so we're seeing rates go up, and that translates into a higher HOA fee. And if you're a landlord, that also incorporates a higher fee with regard to the landlord insurance policy that you're going to have in place in order to protect your facility if something were to happen in one format or another. But I'm a big fan of condos because of the hands-off approach from the exterior aspect of it. But another issue you have when it comes to condos is you don't necessarily control certain things. So like with this unit, I didn't have, or the tenant didn't have, control over when the heat gets turned on for the colder seasons, and when it turns off, or when it gets turned off, right? And so there were scenarios where it was October and it's cold in these units and the heat wasn't on. And so, the tenant was upset about that in the past, due to the fact that there wasn't any heat and the tenant had to use their own portable heaters in order to stay warm. And there was also a few incidents where the HOA cut the heat off too early in the season, right? It's really hard to predict Michigan weather, for one, but it was a bit of a run with regard to hot days. And so the HOA cut off the heat. And then all of a sudden we had this roughly 2-week run of cold weather. And so now this tenant is not able to keep themselves warm via the heating system, because with this being a boiler in this particular building, it already was shut off and drained, or whatever process the HOA has in place in order to preserve the system in one format or another. But those are the types of things you run into with these condos as a landlord if you're buying condos to lease them out. But I still would, if I were to adjust my strategy a bit in hindsight, I would actually, when I was buying single family homes and doors, I would actually put more energy and effort into condos due to the fact that they're a lot easier to maintain. But you got to be mindful of the caveat of the HOA, which is something you really don't have too much control over. And things such as the services, the heat, this is on the same water line. And so these aren't individually metered. And so if there was a water issue and they had to turn the water off on the entirety of the building, the tenant wouldn't have water. Or if the hot water tank went out, which it actually did pretty often, the tenant wouldn't have access to hot water until the association fixes the issue with the hot water tank, right? But I will say that this is probably one of my most successful purchases in real estate, because since I've owned it back in 2017, I've had a tenant in this unit. And so I've only had 2 tenants. And now I'm in a predicament where this tenant moved out and trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. So what are your thoughts? Would you actually buy a condo such as this and rent it out? Or would you prefer your actual house, right? Would you prefer an actual single family property or duplex that gives you a little bit more control, but also comes with a little bit more responsibility? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Talk to you soon.